I still remember the reason why my world stopped that day. In an instant, everything came to a halt, as if time itself froze. Inside the house, the sound of her screams echoed in my ears, refusing to fade. The look in her eyes was something I could never fully understand, a depth I couldn't grasp. And then a loud bang shattered everything. The kind of sound that made your heart skip a beat, as if the world was collapsing around you. In that moment I knew nothing would ever be the same again. What had I missed? What did I not see? The answer was just within reach, but the truth would only reveal itself when it was too late. I've always prided myself on being an ordinary guy. Not extraordinary, not someone who craved the limelight, but solid, dependable. I've got a good job, a beautiful wife, and a son who makes the whole world seem brighter. My name is Adam, and I've always thought my life was about as normal as it could get. A 9-to-5 job at a tech company, a suburban home, and weekends spent with Clara and Ben. That was my life. But now, in the quiet of my thoughts, I realize how much I ignored, how much I didn't notice because I was too busy assuming everything was fine. Clara had always been a dream. She was smart, fiercely independent, and a loving mother to Ben. She carried herself with grace, with a kind of elegance that made her the center of attention in any room. I remember the first time I met her. She was standing across the room, talking to a group of colleagues at a party. I remember feeling a mix of admiration and intrigue. Her voice, smooth like velvet, but strong enough to command attention, was like nothing I had ever heard. There was something captivating about her, something magnetic that pulled me in. I wanted to know everything about her. I did, and over time, I did. Our marriage was built on trust, mutual respect, and shared dreams. I loved her, of course, but somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing her. Or maybe I never really did. For years, Clara was the one who took care of everything, from the bills to the household chores, to making sure Ben's lunch was packed every morning. It wasn't that I didn't help, but I just assumed she had it all figured out. She was the rock, and I was the one who showed up to play my part. But as much as I loved her, there were always those subtle, nagging feelings, the ones that told me that maybe everything wasn't as perfect as I had assumed. That feeling had only grown over the past few months. Clara was becoming more distant, and I found myself becoming more introspective. I kept asking myself what had changed. Was it me? Was it her? Was it the monotony of our lives? I remember the night she told me she was going out with some friends. It was unusual for her, as she rarely had a night out without me. But I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just one of those nights, right? But as the hours ticked by, I started to feel the emptiness that had been creeping up on me. I started noticing little things. The way Clara would smile a little too stiffly when she came home. The way her gaze would drift to the window as if she was somewhere far away. I started to feel it, like the slow suffocation of something once alive and vibrant. Was it the exhaustion of everyday life? Or was there something more? I wanted to ignore it, but that nagging feeling wouldn't let me. It was like a splinter in my mind, a thought that refused to be buried. Our home, though modest, was our sanctuary. Located in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city, It felt like the world outside never reached us. The streets were tree-lined, with leaves that painted the sidewalk in shades of amber and gold every autumn. It was the kind of neighborhood where kids ran in and out of each other's homes, where neighbors waved as they passed by. There was something inherently peaceful about it, almost as if the world outside was too loud for this place to notice. The house itself was something I'd always been proud of. It wasn't grand, but it was cozy. The kitchen was spacious, with granite countertops and an island where Clara would often stand, humming softly as she prepared meals. The living room had these massive windows that let in sunlight in the mornings, casting long shadows across the floor. I loved those mornings, the quiet, the routine. It felt safe here. We had our little routines. Ben and I would play in the backyard while Clara tended to the house. Simple, easy, predictable. But the cracks, as I said, began to appear slowly. It was easy to ignore them at first. A late night here, a distracted smile there. But as time went on, the moments added up. Clara's late nights became more frequent. She would come home exhausted, sometimes looking like she had barely slept. And when I asked her about her day, her responses were curt, distant. She seemed tired of answering the same questions. And then there was the way she looked at me sometimes, like I was a stranger. I convinced myself it was just stress. After all, we were both working long hours. Life was busy, but as each day passed, my doubts grew, and the quiet unease became harder to ignore. It was a Thursday, a day that started like any other. I had just wrapped up a meeting at work and was headed home when I got a message from Clara. "Running late tonight, I'll be home around 9. I wasn't surprised. She'd been working long hours lately, trying to close a big deal at work. But as I walked into our house, I noticed something strange. Clara's phone was lying on the kitchen counter, face up. She never left it unattended. It was unusual, but at first I thought maybe she had just forgotten it. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should leave it alone or check it. Part of me told myself to just let it go. It wasn't my place. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, urged me to look. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the growing unease, the subtle hints that had been bothering me for weeks. Maybe I just needed confirmation, even if I wasn't ready for what I might find. I picked up the phone, and for a moment, I just stared at the screen. The messages were open, and at first glance, they didn't seem out of place. Work emails, casual texts. But then I scrolled further down, and that's when I saw it. The text was from a number I didn't recognize, but the words were unmistakable. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Who was this? Why hadn't Clara mentioned anyone by this name? I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a work colleague, maybe a mistake. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I could feel it in my gut. The following texts were worse, more intimate, more personal. Clara had been texting someone else, someone who seemed to know her in a way that I didn't. My mind swirled with confusion, anger, and disbelief. I had to know more. I had to confront her, but part of me was terrified of what I might learn. As I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the phone, the quietness of the house felt suffocating. I could hear Ben in the other room, playing with his toys. blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. The seconds felt like hours as I debated what to do next. Confront her now. Wait for her to come home. I didn't know if I was ready to face the truth, but I knew that soon I wouldn't have a choice. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken words and emotions that I didn't want to confront. I couldn't stop thinking about the messages, the familiarity, the intimacy. My world was crumbling around me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I spent the rest of the evening pacing around the house. I couldn't sit still. Every noise, every creak of the floorboards felt like it was amplifying the tension in my chest. Clara was still a couple of hours away, and I knew she'd come home tired, possibly already making excuses. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe this was all in my head. But something inside me said it wasn't. When Clara walked in that night, I pretended nothing was wrong. I greeted her with a smile that felt like it was made of plaster. My heart was racing, and my thoughts were all over the place, but I couldn't show it. I had to act normal, at least for now. We ate dinner in silence. Ben talked about his day, oblivious to the storm cloud hanging between us. And Clara? She was distant, her eyes glossed over, as if she was somewhere else entirely. I wanted to ask her about the messages. I wanted to confront her, demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. If I was wrong, if I misjudged her, what then? How would I face her? I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Something had changed, and I needed to know what. The tension continued to build, but the truth, as it always does, was just waiting to explode. And when it did, it would come in a way I never saw coming. The next few days felt like a blur. The house was eerily quiet. Ben had gone to school, and Clara, well, she had left. I didn't know where she was. The silence felt deafening. I had never imagined that something as trivial as silence could feel like a weight. But in that moment, it was all I could hear. The ticking of the clock on the wall, the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, the hum of the refrigerator, all of it felt like a constant reminder of the life that was now shattered. I kept waiting for her to come back, to walk through that door, apologize, and make everything right again. But that never came. Instead, there was just more silence. Days passed, and Clara didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up. The longer I waited, the more I realized that this wasn't some temporary hiccup. This wasn't a misunderstanding. No, but this was something much darker, something irreversible. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been living in a lie for years. Everything I thought I knew about Clara, about our relationship, had been turned upside down. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the realization that I had been blind to the person I thought I knew. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built my life with had been hiding something from me, something that would change everything. But there was more. I could hear her voice in my head, the way she had trembled when she told me about James, the way she couldn't meet my eyes when she confessed. I kept thinking about her words. I've been so confused lately. I thought I could make it work. I thought I could pretend. It was like she was talking about a different life, a different person. The Clara I had known wouldn't have said those things. The Clara I knew would have fought for us. She would have tried harder, but instead she had walked away. I needed answers. I needed to understand why this had happened, why I had been so blind to everything. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about betrayal, and it was about the fact that I had been a fool for trusting her completely. I wanted to confront her again, but I didn't even know where to begin. Would I get answers? Would she tell me everything, or would she just continue to lie? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I wanted to find James. I wanted to know who this man was that had stolen everything from me, from us. But I didn't know where to start. I didn't even know if I was ready to face him. But I couldn't sit around anymore, doing nothing. I couldn't let this go without finding out the truth. That evening I decided to go to the one place I could think of, Clara's workplace. Maybe someone there would know more about James. Maybe I could get some answers, even if they were small ones. I didn't even know if Clara was still there, if she was working tonight, but I had to try. As I drove to her office, my thoughts kept racing. I didn't know what I was going to say when I got there, or if I would even get the answers I was looking for. But at that moment, I didn't care. I was too consumed with the need for closure, the need to know why this had happened. When I arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty. The only car left was Clara's. My stomach churned as I parked next to it, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I couldn't decide if I should go in or not, but I couldn't just leave. I had to know the truth. I walked through the front door, the bells above it jingling lightly as I stepped into the building. The office was dimly lit, but I could see the receptionist sitting at her desk, glancing at me as I walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a bit too cheerful for my liking. I didn't know how to answer her. I didn't know how to explain why I was here. "I'm looking for Clara," I finally said. "Is she still here?" The receptionist frowned. "Clara?" She glanced down at her desk. "I think she left early today. Wasn't feeling well." I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. Clara had left, just like she had left me. I thought about turning around, walking out the door, but something in me refused to give up. "Do you know if anyone else is here?" I asked, my voice low and strained. The receptionist paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, James is still in his office, but I'm not sure if—" Before she could finish, I had already made my way down the hallway. I didn't know what I was expecting, but my heart was pounding in my chest. My palms were sweaty as I reached James's office door. I stopped for a moment, looking at the nameplate on the door, my breath catching in my throat. James Walker. I knocked once, but I didn't wait for a response. I opened the door and walked in. James was sitting at his desk, typing away on his computer, his glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up at me, surprised, but I saw something else in his eyes, something that made my blood run cold. He knew who I was. "Adam," he said, his voice too calm. "What are you doing here?" I stepped forward, the words finally spilling out of my mouth. "I need to talk to you about Clara." James leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "I don't know what you think you're going to accomplish, but Clara—" "I know about you and her," I interrupted, my voice barely controlled. "I know about the affair. I just want to know the truth. I want to know why." James didn't look surprised, but he didn't seem guilty either. He just stared at me, like he was deciding how much to reveal. After a moment of silence, he spoke. "She's been confused, Adam. She didn't know what she wanted. She was unhappy, and I guess I don't know. We got close. One thing led to another." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "Look, I never meant to hurt you, but Clara and it just happened." His words felt like a slap to my face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he really trying to justify what they had done? I wanted to shout, to demand more, but I couldn't find the strength. Instead, I just stood there staring at him, my heart breaking all over again. "Did you ever think about what this would do to me?" I asked, my voice quiet, but filled with a quiet fury. "Did you ever think about us?" James looked down, but I could see the guilt in his eyes now. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He was sorry, but it was too late for apologies. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said quietly. I thought she was just unhappy. I didn't realize how deep it was, how much she had been hiding." I felt a surge of anger, but I kept it contained. "Well, you're going to have to live with that. I hope it was worth it." Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving James behind in his office. The truth was out now, but it didn't bring the closure I thought it would. I had the answers I wanted, but the pain, the betrayal, was still there, hanging in the air like a heavy fog. As I walked back to my car, I realized something. Nothing would ever be the same again, and as I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to fix the damage that had been done. For hours, there had been a painful silence in the house, the kind that stretches across the walls and burrows into your chest, like a slow poison. Ethan sat in the same chair he'd been in since the morning, his back stiff, hands gripping the cold glass of untouched water on the coffee table. Every tick of the wall clock above the mantel rang louder than it should have, and when the front door creaked open, the sound cut through the silence like a blade. He didn't turn around immediately. He wanted it to be her. No, he knew it was her. Her perfume always got caught in the draft before her footsteps ever reached the hallway. But this time, the smell was different. Distant. Less floral, more foreign. "Ethan," came her voice, unsure, almost timid. After all this time, after the funeral, after Hawaii. He turned slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might make the scene shatter like glass. And there she was, Claire, standing there like nothing had happened, like she hadn't missed their son's funeral, like she hadn't just spent the last few weeks smiling for Instagram photos with another man while Ethan buried their child alone. Her eyes welled with tears, but Ethan's face remained a cold mask. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. I didn't know what to say," she began, voice shaking. I was scared. I was angry. I felt trapped and— "You were on a beach," Ethan interrupted, his voice low, almost calm, wearing a red bikini, laughing into another man's chest, while I stood in a black suit, watching a tiny white casket get lowered into the ground. Claire flinched as if he'd slapped her. He stood up slowly, towering over her. "Do you even know what his last words were, Claire?" She blinked, tears now streaming. "No." "He asked for you," Ethan whispered. He kept asking when Mommy was coming, and I lied to him. I told him you were just in the next room, that you'd be there soon. I lied to our dying son. Claire covered her mouth, gasping, her knees buckling slightly. Ethan's voice rose, and I thought maybe you'd show up to the funeral. Maybe the affair was a mistake. Maybe Hawaii was a breakdown. Maybe you needed space. But you posted selfies, Claire, on the day we buried our son. You posted a Fuxim boomerang with cocktails. I didn't know what else to do, she cried, collapsing onto the couch. Everything was falling apart. You were cold. The house was suffocating, and I didn't know how to grieve him. I didn't even get to grieve him. You took that from me when you shut me out. Ethan laughed bitterly. Shut you out? You moved out emotionally the day he was diagnosed. You couldn't even look at him. You'd leave the room when he coughed. You were already gone, Claire. Hawaii just made it official. There was a long silence. Claire's breathing was uneven, shallow. Ethan sat down again, the leather couch groaning under the tension. He looked away from her, toward the fireplace, as if the flames could erase the memory of that hospital room, the beeping machines, the stillness. Then came the words he never wanted to say. Why are you here, Claire? She hesitated. Because I want to fix this, because I know I ran, and I can't change what I did, but I want to try and come back. You can't come back, Ethan said, his voice a steel blade wrapped in velvet. There's nothing left to come back to. We're ashes, Claire, and you lit the match. She stood, pacing, her hands pulling at her hair. Please, Ethan, I know I was horrible. I know I failed him, and you, but I was scared. I didn't know how to be a mother to a dying child. He stood too, voice trembling with restrained rage. Then you don't get to be a mother at all. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. She broke, collapsed into sobs so guttural, so broken, Ethan had to turn away. Not because he felt pity, he didn't, but because her pain sounded like an echo of his own. And then, the knock. 3 loud, deliberate knocks at the door. They both froze. Ethan glanced at Claire, whose face was still buried in her hands. He walked to the door, unsure who would come at this hour. When he opened it, a man stood there, tall, tan, muscular, wearing the same smile Ethan had seen on Claire's phone screen 100 times over the past weeks. "Hey," the man said, "is Claire here?" Ethan didn't respond, just stared. "I just flew in," the man said. "She hasn't been answering my calls. I know this is weird, but..." "She's busy," Ethan said, his voice flat. "Can I just..." Ethan didn't let him finish. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Now they stood on the porch, inches apart. "You're him," Ethan said, "the guy from Maui." "Yeah, I guess," the man said, a little confused. "Look, I didn't know about the funeral. I thought she was separated from you already. She said she needed space." Ethan let out a slow breath. "Did she tell you we had a 5-year-old son?" The man blinked. "Yeah, I mean, she mentioned she had a kid, but not." "He died," Ethan said. "Leukemia. We buried him while you two were paddleboarding." The man's face paled. Ethan stepped forward, lowering his voice. "So now you tell me, why the fuck are you on my porch?" The man raised his hands, backing up. Look, I didn't know, I swear. I thought I was helping her escape something toxic. I didn't know. She was the toxic one, Ethan said. Then came Claire's voice from inside, muffled but shrill. "Who is it?" The man called out. "It's me, babe. I just wanted to see if you were okay." "Don't call her that," Ethan snapped. But it was too late. Claire opened the door, her face now a storm of guilt and panic. She looked at the man, then at Ethan, then stepped out between them. "What are you doing here?" she hissed at the man. "You weren't answering me. I was worried." Ethan watched the exchange like a ghost, watching his own life burn. And then, like a switch had flipped, Claire turned to Ethan, her eyes now suddenly sharp. "I needed someone," she said, and he was there. Ethan's jaw clenched. So was I, every fucking night, holding our son's hand, reading him stories, praying to a God I didn't believe in just to keep him alive. And you were dancing on hotel balconies. A tense silence followed. Then the man stepped forward. "Maybe I should go." Ethan didn't let him finish. With one quick, sudden movement, he grabbed the man by the shirt and slammed him against the porch railing. "Don't ever come near my house again," he growled. "You don't get to be part of this. You're a tourist in a horror story, and your trip is over." The man stumbled back, raising his hands again, and left quickly down the path. Claire stood there, frozen. Ethan turned to her, shaking now. "You don't get to play victim anymore, Claire. You abandoned us, him, me, and now you want what? Redemption, closure." She didn't answer. "I watched our son die," Ethan whispered. "And you didn't even say goodbye." The silence was absolute. Then Ethan said the one thing he never imagined he'd have to say. "You need to leave." Claire's eyes widened. "Ethan." He opened the door, motioning for her to go inside, grab her things, and get out. There was no more yelling, no more screaming, just cold, bitter finality. Claire moved like a ghost, slowly gathering her bag. She stood at the threshold for a moment, as if waiting for him to change his mind. He didn't. She walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan allowed himself to collapse to the floor and sob. Not for her, not even for his son, but for the gaping, irreparable hole life had torn into him, for the kind of grief that doesn't end, only softens around the edges like a worn stone in the ocean. The silence that followed the court's verdict was unlike any silence John had ever experienced. It wasn't the silence of peace or of justice settling over the room like a calm mist. It was heavier, like the silence that falls after a storm has ripped through a town, when the wreckage still speaks louder than words. The judge's voice still echoed faintly in his ears. Full custody awarded to the plaintiff, Mr. John Carter. Restraining order against the defendant, effective immediately. Assets to be divided as per the agreement. Divorce granted. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. John walked out of the courtroom alone. No family waiting with open arms. No friends clapping him on the back. Just the sound of his shoes against the polished marble floor as he walked away from what used to be a life. Or a lie, depending on how you looked at it. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. People rushed past him, lawyers, clients, security guards. A child cried in the distance, maybe protesting bedtime, maybe asking for a toy. John stopped, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. He didn't hate Emily. He had spent months trying to, but there was nothing left to hate. She had burned through every bit of love, trust, and betrayal, like a wildfire devouring its own forest. What remained was not hatred, but a hollow void where something used to be. It was worse than hate. Emily hadn't spoken a word during the entire final court session, not a glance, not a tear, just sat there like a shell, drained and distant. Her lover, the man she abandoned her family for, had been nowhere to be seen. Not in court, not in her apartment. Word on the street was that he ghosted her after the story broke. Apparently even cheaters don't like being publicly known as homewreckers. The scandal was messy. Social media had taken their wedding photo, circled her face, and turned her into a meme. John wasn't the one who posted it, but he didn't stop it either. 3 months had passed since the court's final decision. Winter had started to fade into a reluctant spring, but John's world remained cold. He had returned to the old house, his house now. The echoes inside weren't just of footsteps on hardwood, but of laughter that used to live in the corners, of bedtime stories half finished, of a child's tiny feet running through the hallway. Daniel's room remained untouched. Every time John passed by the door, he paused. Sometimes he'd go in. Sometimes he'd just stand outside, hand on the knob, listening for something that wasn't there. Once, in the dead of night, he sat on the floor beside Daniel's bed, clutching his son's favorite stuffed dinosaur, and whispered apologies into the dark. Apologies for not protecting him better, for the shouting, for the pain, for not being enough. Emily had tried to contact him once, just once. A short, typed-out message. I know you hate me. I don't expect forgiveness. Just wanted to say I'm sorry, not for leaving, but for everything else. He didn't reply, not because he didn't have things to say, but because no combination of words felt equal to the wreckage she had caused. She wasn't sorry for leaving. She was sorry it backfired. She had made her choices, let her live with them. The custody ruling had been clear. She wasn't allowed anywhere near John or Daniel's grave. But someone had broken that rule. John had gone to visit the cemetery one evening, a Friday, carrying fresh blue irises. He found another bouquet already there, wilted roses, a note tucked beneath them. He didn't touch it, just stood there, stared at it like it was a foreign object that didn't belong. Maybe it was from Emily, maybe not. Either way, it didn't matter. The ground didn't care who wept above it. The days were long, but the nights were longer. He threw himself into work, shift after shift, clocking in early and leaving late. His co-workers noticed the change. The way he'd go quiet mid-conversation, the dark circles under his eyes, the sudden loss of interest in lunch breaks or small talk. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one knew how to talk about it, and that suited John just fine. Then one evening, something happened that snapped him out of his numb routine. It was raining hard, and John had just pulled into his driveway when he noticed a figure standing on the porch, not moving, not ringing the bell, just standing there. His heart slammed against his ribs. For a moment he thought it might be Emily. Maybe she'd lost her mind and showed up uninvited. But as he stepped closer, he saw it wasn't her. It was a young woman, soaked from head to toe. Maybe 20, maybe a bit younger. Her eyes were wide, red from crying. "Are you John Carter?" she asked, her voice trembling. He nodded cautiously. I'm sorry to show up like this." She stammered. "I know I shouldn't be here, but I think you knew my brother." John blinked, confused. "Your brother?" Jason Miller." The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Emily's lover. John stared at her. For a long time, the rain continued to fall between them. I found your address from the court transcripts," she said quickly, sensing his rising discomfort. "I swear I'm not here to cause trouble. I needed to talk to you. Please." Against every instinct, John opened the door and let her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, dripping onto the floor, clutching her soaked bag like it was a lifeline. John handed her a towel, then sat across from her in silence. "My name's Lila," she said. "Jason was my older brother. He died 2 weeks ago." John's breath caught. Lila looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers anxiously. "Overdose. They said it was accidental, but I don't know. He hadn't been the same since. Everything." John stared at her, unsure of what to say. "I hated what he did," she said, tears brimming again. "He wasn't a bad person growing up, I swear. But when I heard what happened, how he got involved with a married woman, how a little boy died and a family shattered, I didn't even recognize him anymore." She wiped her face, angry at herself for crying. "I'm not here to defend him. I just thought you should know. I figured maybe part of you needed to hear that he didn't get away scot-free." John swallowed hard. He didn't know what he felt. Relief? Bitterness? Grief? "I'm sorry," she said again. "I know I have no right to be here. I just wanted to tell you and say I'm sorry for what my brother did to your life." He finally found his voice. "You didn't do this," he said softly. "But it was my blood," she whispered. "My family. And mine destroyed it," he replied. "So where does that leave us?" She didn't have an answer. Neither did he. They sat there for a long time. Two broken souls tangled in the wreckage, left by people they once loved. When she finally left, John felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Closure, not peace, but a thread of understanding in the mess. Maybe that was enough. For now. The house had never been this quiet. John had lived with silence for months now, but this quiet, this particular stillness, was different. After Lila's visit, something inside him had shifted, not like a sudden jolt, not a breakdown or awakening, more like a slow undoing, as if his soul was finally loosening its grip on everything it had tried so hard to hold in place. He began sorting through Daniel's room, not to erase him, not to move on, whatever that meant, but to transform the space from a shrine of pain to a space of remembrance. Every drawer, every toy, every crayon-scribbled page was touched with reverence. He didn't throw much away. He didn't have the heart. But he began organizing, packing things carefully, wrapping fragile memories in tissue paper like old glass. He kept the dinosaur. That night, he placed it on the bookshelf in the living room, in full view, a silent guardian, a reminder of joy and loss and everything in between. He also went to the cemetery again, this time with no flowers, no words, just presence. As he stood by the small grave, a soft breeze stirred the air. Somewhere in the distance, kids were laughing, probably in the park nearby. It made his throat tighten. "I'm still here, buddy," he whispered, "and I still miss you every second." His hand trembled as he rested it on the headstone. "But I think maybe I'm ready to start living again, for you." And he did. Slowly. He started going to therapy, real therapy. Not the court-mandated sessions, but ones he sought out himself. He found a grief counselor who didn't try to fix him, but just sat with him in the pain, helping him untangle the endless knots of guilt, betrayal, rage, and unbearable love. He began journaling. Every night. Letters to Daniel, some full of stories, others just filled with "I miss you," repeated over and over. And sometimes just silence. Pages left blank because words failed him. And eventually, he talked to other fathers. He found a support group for parents who'd lost children, some to illness, some to accidents, some to senseless violence. The first few sessions he barely spoke, just listened, cried sometimes. But one evening, when another man choked up trying to explain how he felt like a failure every day, John reached out, placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Me too." It was the first time someone had touched him back with understanding since Daniel's death. John also began volunteering at a youth center for troubled boys, not because he thought he could save anyone, but because he knew what it meant to feel like your world was slipping out from under you. He saw kids like Daniel, kids like himself, and every time he helped one of them through a crisis, a part of his own heart felt less heavy. Emily, on the other hand, had vanished. After Jason's death, she went quiet. No more messages. No legal attempts to reach out. John occasionally heard whispers. Someone saw her working as a waitress 2 towns over. Someone else mentioned she'd been spotted in a rehab center. He didn't investigate. He didn't care to. Whatever life she was building, it was no longer tied to his. He'd cut that cord, and he had no intention of reattaching it. But one day an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a small locket, silver, slightly tarnished. He recognized it immediately. It was the one Emily had worn the day they brought Daniel home from the hospital. Inside were 2 tiny pictures, one of Daniel as a baby, bundled in blue, and one of John, grinning stupidly, eyes full of awe. There was no note, just the locket. He almost threw it away, almost, but something stopped him. Maybe it was Daniel's face, or maybe it was the silent acknowledgement that whatever they had once been, a family, however briefly, it still mattered, even if it was broken now. He didn't forgive her, but he let the hatred die. Justice had already been served, and sometimes letting go was its own kind of justice. As spring turned to summer, John made a decision. He sold the house, not to escape it, but because he needed a new chapter. The walls had absorbed too much pain, and though he loved it, It was time to leave. He moved into a smaller home, closer to the youth center, in a neighborhood filled with life and noise. Kids played outside, neighbors waved, the kind of place Daniel would have loved. And with the money from the sale, he started something new. The Daniel Carter Foundation, a small nonprofit aimed at helping grieving parents, especially fathers, find support after unimaginable loss. It offered therapy sponsorships, workshops, and eventually retreats in the mountains for emotional healing. At the launch event, John stood before a crowd of 40 people, therapists, parents, volunteers, and gave a speech. "I lost my son to an accident," he began, "but I lost my marriage long before that. I lost myself somewhere in between. I spent months trying to understand how it all went so wrong, and why people I loved most could hurt me the worst. I don't have all the answers, but I've learned this: grief doesn't end. It evolves, and sometimes the only way out of the darkness is by lighting someone else's path." People cried, people clapped, and John, for the first time, didn't feel like an imposter in his own life. That night, after the event, he sat on the porch of his new home, holding a letter in his hand, one he'd never sent, one written for Daniel months ago. He unfolded it and began to read aloud. "Dear Daniel, I miss your giggle, the way you used to say paschetti instead of spaghetti. I miss your obsession with dinosaurs and your endless questions about space. I miss your hugs. God, I miss your hugs. But I need you to know, Daddy's okay now. I wasn't for a while. I was angry, lost, and so full of pain I didn't know how to breathe. I blamed myself, blamed your mom, blamed the world. But now I just remember you every day, and I try to do something good in your name, something you'd be proud of. I still cry, but I also smile sometimes. I still ache, but I also love, and I will carry you with me, always." He folded the letter back up and looked at the stars. "I love you, buddy," he whispered, "forever." The wind rustled the trees gently, as if replying. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt whole, not because the pain was gone, but because he'd made room for it in a life that continued. The past was a scar, but scars meant healing, and healing, slow as it was, meant hope. They say grief comes in waves. Sometimes it knocks the wind out of you. Sometimes it just brushes against your ankles. But it always comes back. That was the truth John had come to accept. Not just with pain, but with memory, with love, with every decision that brought him to this moment. After everything had burned down around him, after the funeral, the betrayal, the violence, the investigations, the truth, and the silence, what remained was him, alone, standing in the wreckage of the life he thought he had, and yet somehow still breathing. The human heart is strange. It breaks, cracks, collapses under weight it was never meant to carry, and still keeps beating, still finds a rhythm, still pushes forward. For months, maybe even years, John would wake up, expecting to hear the soft padding of Daniel's feet on the hallway carpet, followed by a sleepy "Dad." But the house remained silent, deafeningly silent, and in that silence he found more truth than he ever did in all the years of pretending things were fine. Silence doesn't lie. It doesn't manipulate or deceive. It just sits with you, a mirror to what's missing. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the image of his wife on a beach with another man while he stood over their child's grave. It wasn't even the funeral, or the fight with Jason, or the endless hours of screaming and crying when no one else was around. The hardest part was learning to live again, not just to survive, but to actually breathe without guilt, to smile without feeling like he was disrespecting Daniel's memory, to laugh at something stupid on TV without the immediate instinct to shut it off and punish himself for feeling anything other than pain. For a long time, John thought justice would fix things. He thought exposing the truth, shaming Emily, uncovering Jason's corruption, watching it all unravel would somehow bring balance to the nightmare. But justice isn't neat. It's not a story with a clean ending or a judge slamming a gavel. Sometimes justice is slow. Sometimes it's cruel. Sometimes it never comes at all. And sometimes, just sometimes, it shows up in the quiet aftermath, in knowing the people who wronged you now have to sit with the choices they made for the rest of their lives. Emily would live with the knowledge that while her husband buried their son, she was sipping cocktails in a stranger's arms. That her selfishness didn't just ruin a marriage, it hollowed out a life. No court could hand down a sentence heavier than the weight she'd have to carry. Jason's fate was more immediate, more dramatic, but not necessarily more satisfying. The man died as recklessly as he lived, taking with him secrets that would never be confessed, apologies that would never be spoken. Was it enough? John didn't know. There were no cheers, no sense of triumph, just another layer of emptiness. But grief, like a wildfire, clears the ground for new growth, if you let it, and that's what John did. Slowly, painfully, with resistance and reluctance, but he did it. He sold the house, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't walk through the kitchen without picturing Daniel eating cereal in his dinosaur pajamas. He moved to a smaller place, started therapy, and even began working with other grieving parents, helping them navigate the kind of loss that doesn't have words. He didn't call himself a survivor. He didn't want pity. He just wanted to make sure Daniel's name meant something. The foundation he started in Daniel's honor grew faster than he ever imagined, not because he pushed it, but because people recognized the raw honesty behind it. It wasn't just about child safety or grief counseling. It was about truth, about making space for the kind of pain people are usually too afraid to talk about. And through it all, John stayed quiet. He didn't give interviews. He didn't write books. He let the work speak for itself. Because at the end of the day, what mattered wasn't what people said. It was what they did. Sometimes he would sit in the back of the foundation office watching young parents walk in, eyes heavy with the same kind of despair he once carried, and he'd remember the days he thought he wouldn't survive. But he had. Not because he was strong, not because he had a plan, but because he had no choice. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes just staying alive is the victory. Years passed, and the pain softened. It never disappeared. It never could. But it softened. The edges dulled. The nights grew a little quieter. There were still dreams, some beautiful, some terrifying. There were still days when he'd catch himself reaching for 2 plates instead of 1. But there was also hope. Real, fragile, quiet hope. And then came the day he visited Daniel's grave alone. Not for the first time, but for the first time without anger. He knelt, placed a tiny toy dinosaur on the stone, and whispered, "I'm still here, buddy." And for the first time in years, he felt something shift. Not closure, not peace, but something close. A breath of something that felt like forgiveness. Not for Emily, not for Jason, but for himself. Because the hardest person to forgive had always been himself. Life didn't get easier, but John got better at carrying the weight. He found joy in smaller things, in a child's laughter on the street, in the quiet moments of solitude, in helping a father choose a headstone, in sitting beside a mother too numb to cry. These weren't grand gestures, but they were real, and they mattered. He never remarried, not because he didn't believe in love, but because his heart had already lived a lifetime's worth. He made peace with that. Not every story ends with a new beginning. Some just end, and that's okay. As for Emily, they never spoke again. She reached out once, a letter, apologetic, rambling, full of excuses and half-truths. He read it once, then burned it, not out of hatred, but because he didn't need her words anymore. He didn't need her validation. He had nothing left to say to the woman who left him at his lowest, the woman who chose lust over love, escape over empathy. He thought about Jason sometimes, not fondly, not with hate either, just with curiosity. How someone could throw away so much for so little. How someone could live so recklessly, so selfishly, and still expect the world to bend in their favor. Jason was a lesson, a warning, a ghost. John's story isn't unique. That's what he realized in the end. There are thousands, millions of people walking around with broken hearts and silent stories. People who trusted the wrong person, who lost someone too soon, who stood alone in moments that should have been shared. And those people, they carry the world on their shoulders, silently, bravely. So maybe this story isn't just about betrayal or death or justice. Maybe it's about endurance, about the quiet strength it takes to keep going when the world gives you every reason to stop. And maybe, just maybe, it's about love. Not the kind that ends in romance or happy endings, but the kind that lingers, that leaves echoes, that outlives us. Because in the end, John didn't just lose his son. He learned what it meant to carry someone inside you forever. And that kind of love, that never dies.